I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The lifestyle medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Howdy, brother Simon. You are there in a jumper and I'm not. And I can tell you, I've actually just been for a ride. I like warm weather, but I went for a ride just today. I normally go early and I organised to meet a friend at 11 a.m. instead. And even before we started, I thought this was a bad idea. So it's hot in Australia at the moment. It looks like it's not so in your part of the world.
It's not so where I am right now. It's about mornings are about 5 degrees, and it is morning here, so it is about 5 degrees. And I'll be heading to the gym later, but I tend to leave this pullover on until I get to the gym and do a workout. The days are getting to about maybe 11 or 12, so it's kind of still cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
I tell you what, though, It's a nice pullover you've got there. You're flying the flag for something.
I know you've got one exactly the same, so you should. We should do an episode where you wear yours as well, and
we will.
Even if no one else cares, we'll at least feel like we match.
For sure. We'll just wait till it's not like 100 degrees here. But that's from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine Conference. We just came back from it. Got our little pullovers. So it was a great event. But I have a question.
And in fact, we should maybe share with people that pretty soon in our lineup of episodes, cued by our experience travelling to the American College of Lifestyle Medicine Conference, we are going to record an episode on the topic of jet lag and how you can manage that with lifestyle medicine. So jet lag, of course, is something that affects most people at some time or another, and there are some ways that we can approach that I won't say they cure it, but they certainly help us to manage the effects. So we'll get onto that shortly, won't we?
We will. But in the meantime, I've got a question for you. So are you familiar with the little poem / song called "There's a Hole in My Bucket"? There's the
one that goes, there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza? Is that the one?
It's Dear Liza.
Yeah.
Dear Liza. Yeah.
Dear Liza, there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, there's a hole in my bucket. That's as much as I know.
Well, the quiz question was, how much of it do you know? So this was a short response.
There we go. There's your answer.
So
there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, there's a hole in my bucket. That's as much as I know.
And there's definitely a hole in the bucket. So can you remember the essence of what the little poem's about, what the little song's about?
Absolutely not.
Like So, okay. Well, it's a little circular story. So if you remember, they go, there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, and then she's instructed to go fix it. And she says, well, go fix it. I think it's Dear Henry. So I should have brushed up on the lyrics too, but Dear Henry.
So this will be a reference. This will be a reference to Pygmalion if it's Henry and Liza, I imagine. But
true.
Yeah,
but that's not the point of the story. Henry's instructed to go fix this bucket, and he says, "Okay, I'll go fix it, but there's a problem. I need to cut some wood to do that, and my saw is blunt." And anyway, she says, "Well, we'll go sharpen it then, Henry. Go sharpen your saw." And anyway, says, "Well, I would sharpen my saw, but I need to, use the grinding machine to do that." And she said, "Well, use the grinding machine." And he said, "Well, the problem is I need water. I need water to run the grinding machine while I'm sharpening my axe." And she says, "Well, go get the water." And he said, "I can't because there's a hole in my bucket." Right? So anyway.
Can I just make an observation at this point?
Sure.
That these two would be useless in an emergency.
Exactly right. So it's this nice little circular, like, hey, I can't do that. Well, why? And then we're back to the same problem, and then they go around.
Okay.
So it's one of those sort of never-ending endings in little ditties. But it reminds me of this whole idea of the 5 whys. And maybe you've heard about the 5 whys before. And
absolutely.
I'm thinking one of the pioneering voices in this space was Sakichi Toyota, spelt with a white toy odor, but he was actually the founder of the Toyota Corporation. And he had this little thing where he'd talk about the 5 whys. So if there was a problem, he would ask why. What's the cause of that problem? And then you would have to go, what's the cause of that? And then what's the cause of that? And he ascertained that if you asked 5 times, like the why, what's the cause of that? What's the cause of that? You actually got back eventually to the root cause of it all. And there's real, it actually, I have flashbacks when we talk about why questions to my kids. They go through that age, that period where there's just those incessant, but why? But why? And it's highly frustrating. But obviously for them, it's a great educational experience as they try and get to the nuts and bolts of what really matters. Well, I would like to apply the 5 whys to this whole idea of the poor health of people. Right. So we know that today, and I'm actually, by the way, I want to acknowledge Professor Gary Egger here, he published on this topic. And Professor Egger is an epidemiologist who are in the business of asking the whys. They're trying to get back to the root cause of what these things, what drives this particular thing. So we're going to start. Our starting point is the poor health of people. Right? And today, the predominant cause of the poor health of people, in fact, the number one cause of morbidity and mortality is actually chronic disease. Okay, so what the epidemiologist would start with that point and say, okay, well, chronic disease is our major problem today for the health of people. What's the cause of that? And when you step back one level, you come up and obviously what starts to emerge is these risk factors. And we would refer to these as, sort of biometric risk factors. So we talk about things like, high cholesterol levels, hot insulin resistance, metaflammation was one of Gary's terms that he'd use. Obesity might be considered one of those risk factors or those markers as well. But then you ask, of course, what's the cause of that? And we're stepping back to sort of more distal causes. And what we know, the cause of these sort of biometric risk factors are things like overnutrition, inactivity, high levels of stress. And so we would then ask, well, what's the cause of that? The next why. And it's the modern lifestyle that drives these things. And so we come back to, okay, what's the modern lifestyle, which is leading to these changed behaviours, which influences our biometric risk factors, which leads on then to these diseases. But then you can ask the question, and the epidemiologists do, what's the cause of that? And the cause of the modern lifestyle is actually economic growth. And so it's quite well constructed within the sort of epidemiological literature that the root cause of the poor health of people is actually economic growth. And what's quite interesting, there's some really fascinating studies, for example, in World War II, where they have communities where, for example, the army would come in and take all of their resources. So all of a sudden, these communities, they didn't have, fuel to drive their vehicles or use their manual labouring tools. So they'd have to work more manually. They'd have to grow their own food because they couldn't purchase it. So, and what you actually see is that downturn in economic growth actually would result in improvements in their chronic disease markers and metrics, which is really quite fascinating. So there's it's a really interesting sort of why. If you step back, the root cause of chronic disease and the poor health of people is actually the economic growth. But intriguingly enough, yes, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are coming to mind as we have this conversation. The first is I'm going to say I'm not a fan of the short phrase root cause, and the reason I'm not a fan is because when you use that phrase, it cues you to look for one thing. And one of the very early in my career as a psychologist, I undertook training in what's called systemic family therapy. And anyone who's a family therapist or couple therapist will be familiar with that. But the point of the systems training is developing an appreciation of the circularity of systems and the multiple the multiple causality of whatever it is we observe. So I much prefer, if we have to use a phrase like that, I much prefer root causes, which makes us look at each layer for more than one thing and not just that singular explanation. The other reason I don't like it is because sometimes you can convince yourself that you've got back to the beginning and maybe you haven't. So the question that's now on my mind is, but what's behind economic growth? And you might say capitalism, and then we get to another question. So what, how come capitalism is a thing, and what else might there be to explain the economic growth factors? And it sounds like maybe this is where we're going. So,
and that's where you've jumped the gun.
I'll keep quiet at this point.
No, but I love that. I love that thinking. So hold this thought for a moment before we get to that the root causes, or if we sort of trace back and ask the whys, economic growth actually leads ultimately to the poor health of people. But let's apply that same paradigm to the poor health of the planet, because we know the planet's not doing well at the moment as well. And so we have this, in humans, we're seeing this sort of biological pathology, but in the planet, we're seeing this sort of ecological pathology, manifesting as, natural disasters and all the rest of it. And so you ask, well, what's the cause of that? And you actually can follow and trace back a very similar pathway to human biological pathology. And so, for example, one step back, what we would say is there are actually risk factors, and they're not biometric like in our body, but they're ecometric risk factors within the planet that are leading to these poor things. So, for example, I'm talking about global warming. I'm talking about climate
sea
change,
temperatures and
temperature, rising carbon levels, which have sort of increased 40% or so in the last 3 decades or 4 decades. But then you can say, of course, just like we asked for humans, well, what's the cause of that? Well, it's actually things like overproduction, right? So just like in humans, we're talking about overnutrition. From a planetary point of view, we're talking about overproduction. We're talking about pollution. We're talking about resource stress as compared to sort of psychological stress in humans. And then if we ask, well, what's the cause of that? Well, it's the modern lifestyle. And then, of course, if you ask what the cause of that, it links back, or can be linked back to this whole concept of economic growth. What I find fascinating, so this is Gary Eger's work, and I find this fascinating because what it really says is that you can trace a common thread from economic growth to this downstream spilling over of both the poor health of people and the planet. And so I find that so we're connected, so all of a sudden it's this sort of scientific construct for thinking about this idea that the poor health of people and the planet is intimately connected, because it actually can flow out of a common causality, if you like, this economic growth thing. So this is where we go to where you've already gone. The epidemiologists often stop at that point, but I'd love to ask the question, like you already have, well, what's the cause of that? What is it? What is the cause of economic growth? And I want to posit that the cause of that is actually, and I'm interested, and I'm going to use this term, and I don't know if it's the correct term to use, but I actually saw a Medscape article come out just last week, and it used this term, and it sort of caught my eye. But it said it referred to the human condition. Right? It's like there's something about us humans that just very nicely flows into this whole idea of economic growth. Of bigger, better, and bigger and better is better, like that kind of concept. And of course, there's value in that. Like I look around at the technologies that we have, this whole idea of us sort of, there's actually a great, I was listening to a song by Dan and Shay, the country singers, and it's called Bigger Houses. And they, in the song, the lyrics talk about there will always be a higher high. And it's true, like I think when I learned to hang glide, we started on a sand dune, But as soon as you were sort of done a few runs on there, you're looking up the hill like, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to be up there. And we see this. This is just, and even in kids, we see this. I'd love to do an experiment with kids where, you said, hey, kids, come and play with these toys. And, and you have a few toys for them to play, maybe a little jump that they can do with their toy cars. But over in the corner, have a big jump, with some bigger toys. And see how long does it take for even kids to go, looks good over there. Like, how can I tap into that? It's like there's something in us humans. I'd love your thoughts on this. Something in us humans that drives bigger and better.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, I'm not a fan of the phrase "the human condition." And now people are going to start forming this idea that I don't like two-word phrases, which is not true. Ice cream, for example, I love that phrase.
You like?
Yeah. So it's nothing about two-word phrases, but the human condition leads us to form the view that there again is a single human condition. And I don't think there is. I guess at some stage, if we get distal enough, we can say that. But in becoming that distal, we lose a lot of meaning and nuance as well. The human condition is a bit like you've spoken about this recently. A bit like that box in the structural equation model that just says other factors.
Yeah.
We don't know what they are, but we think there's something there, so we're just going to call it something, and it really doesn't explain anything. So to sort of truly explore this, I think we need to ask, what elements of it are, what elements of humanity or being human might be driving this. And you've mentioned the idea of, the idea you just mentioned is possibly. It's probably a combination. It's a combination of curiosity, of desire. There's an initial curiosity about what's over there. Then there's a desire to be there, to do that. Perhaps there's also an underlying belief. Then we can ask, why is that desire there? Well, the desire might be there because there's an underlying belief that this will help me do or be something that I see as useful or desirable in turn, and so on. So we can keep exploring these. So when we talk about the human condition, I think we really need to start unpacking what that is and what it actually means. And at some level, so if we use this idea of proximal factors, the things closest to us, medial factors, and then the distal factors, the things furthest away. Most of the time, the distal factors, at least in my experience, often end up strongly weighted towards beliefs and attitudes. We are influenced to do things because somewhere we have a belief that action or that object or whatever it might be is going to do or bring something desirable for us, and therefore we pursue it. So, for example, it would be very easy to, in the context we're talking about, it would be very easy to stop at the notion of greed as explanatory and say, well, the planet's in the state it is because of human greed. That's greed drives capitalism. Well, let's accept that tentatively just for a moment. But why is greed there? Why do humans behave in that way? And I don't have a definitive answer to that, but I guess at some level there's maybe something to do with survival fear that we could surmise comes into that. If I've got a fundamental concern about my capacity to survive, then one of the things I might do is gather and hoard a lot of things so that I can be confident that I'm going to be able to live through periods of famine or darkness or something like that. All that happens really is we just keep ending up asking questions, which is, I've got to say, is kind of the way it should be, I think.
I think so. And, I love some of the words you've used there, and particularly one that I'll hone in on, desire. Because desire probably is one of the things that we're there's a lot of pointing to. In fact, and I self-declaring, I sort of come from a faith background. I'm interested very much in philosophical and spiritual, insights and that. And I look at, and what you see in a lot of faith traditions, they're trying to address this and trying to make sense of this whole idea of, where does that come from? Where does that desire come from? Where does greed come from? And by the way, I do agree with you. I think that humans, probably unlike any other species, have this ability to look ahead, and with that comes two great things. One great thing. One is the ability to dream and to plan and to do remarkable things. The other flip side of it is to worry. And, worry's been described as the greatest cause of human suffering. And maybe that's what drives us. Well, we need to hoard things up. We need to store up so that just when the hard times come, because, I can, sort of hallucinate that will happen, because we're pretty good at doing that, that therefore I feel safer. But it is interesting. Many faith traditions try and speak to this whole idea of desire and greed in particular. And I look at, in Buddhist tradition, there's this whole idea of not holding too tightly to things. So it's not like don't hoard, don't. Within sort of the monotheistic religions, even the Genesis story is this story of basically God saying to humanity, "Hey guys, don't go that pathway. Don't want more. Don't think you want to be like a god, because I'm telling you, if you go that pathway, it's going to end up in your ultimate demise." And not making a judgment call here. I'm just saying cause and effects. This is the direction it's going to go if you pursue this insatiable pursuit of more. And so,
and also in those religious traditions, that both the monotheistic traditions and other traditions as well, there are ideas that actively push against that. Against the idea of greed. So there are, for example, there are values and morals coded into those traditions to do with generosity, to do with giving and sharing what you have, which is kind of the it's kind of the antithesis of greed, isn't it? The idea that right. I might share out of what I have. And in fact, some of those traditions, and I'm thinking about a particular story, which I think appears in one of the New Testament Gospels, and I can't immediately think which one. Maybe it's several. The story of an elderly woman who has very, very little. Nevertheless, she shares some of what she has. So those ideas are kind of there's obviously historically been for many millennia before you and I turned up to do a podcast on it. There's been this kind of reflection on who we are as human beings and how that both helps and hinders us, and what are some of the choices that we can nevertheless make despite those tendencies to live
and I like that
good and fruitful and productive lives.
Yeah, and I think that word tendency, because I wrestle with this myself, right? I'm in this interesting scenario, right, where I've tried to be more moderate, right? There's actually an interesting word that was used about 150 years ago amongst the modern health reformers. They often talked about, they use this word abstemiousness, and basically what it meant was everything in moderation. No, even good things you can get too much of a good thing. So sort of, you don't always have to be bigger, better, and all the rest of it. And I find it a really interesting term, and I struggle with this because my latest sport, for example, is foiling, right? So I'm into this surf foiling and all the rest of it. And I get a foil and I go, this is great. And then I go down the beach and I look and there's a guy with the new foil and he says that it's about 20% faster. And I'm like, this is it. Like, this is how bad I am, right? I'm bearing myself and I'm like, 20% faster, that would be really great. And next thing you know, all of a sudden I've got one of those as well. But then the next model comes out and it's just this.
All of a sudden.
All of a sudden. And I proliferate my toys, right? And I'm thinking, I want to, hey, but here's the interesting thing. Sometimes it actually detracts from my quality of life, because now I go down to the beach and I go, which one should I be using? Oh, if I go out and it's that, and then I'll have, whereas when I had one, when everything was in moderation, it was actually a simpler existence and it was happier. So I'm wrestling with this idea of, what is enough? Yeah. Maybe that's the word. What's enough? What is enough?
Yeah.
Not to take away from the fact that, the humanity's ability to think and dream and pursue, that's a beautiful thing. Like, and you talk about capitalism, it achieves good things, but unbridled capitalism, well, it can get ridiculous too, can't it? Like, where is that?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Where is that happy ground? I've actually now, I'm now the well-being ambassador / advisor for some over 55 lifestyle villages. And it's really interesting. I go to and visit these sites, and
I need to ask a question. I need to ask a question here, and I hope you don't think I'm out of line. Do you actually have any professional and real life credibility as an over 55?
Hey, no, it's 55 and over, and I qualify. I'm 55.
Okay, all right, okay.
So there you go.
Continue. Oh, that's okay. I just want to make sure you got the qualifications for this.
I'm credible. I'm credible. I fit the demographic. But what's so fascinating for me when I visit these sites and I chat with some people and the residents in there, and there's a really consistent story that I hear, and that is that, listen, we were in a big house. We had all the bells and whistles, and you know what? We actually just thought, we're banging around here. The kids have gone. We're empty nesters. What do we do? And then it was a big decision, but we decided, and they often use the term, didn't downsize, they right-sized. And I quite like that.
Right-sized.
So they right-sized, and they've moved into this lifestyle village. And, we're not talking about shabby village here. This is like, one of the ones I went to recently, beautiful clubhouse. There's a pool there. There's, a little cinema. There's, so it's a beautiful spot. But their homes are relatively simple, very nice, but quite similar in as well. There's consistency throughout. And these people consistently say, should have done this years ago. Like, this is, we've got all this community around us. We don't have to care for things. It's not like there's ongoing maintenance with all these things, trying to decide which foil you're going to use that day. And we've got, meaningful things we can engage with. And they're saying, this is just a beautiful thing. Like, this is, and it has been this, it's this moderation in desire, really. Well, maybe it's a different kind of desire. Maybe it's desiring the right things at the right time. I don't know. I haven't thought hard enough about this, but I'm interested in this.
Yeah.
What is enough? What is enough? And do we, in the pursuit of more, do we actually detract not only from our own well-being as the flow-on effect, but from the well-being of the planet too? And maybe we could do a whole lot of good if we went back and did a bit of a self-examination there, and as a collective, and explore that question of what does enough look like.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
It's intriguing to me that amongst young people, this is, and I'm not, advocating any particular sort of philosophical viewpoint or whatever, but do you know that there's increasing interest in communism, believe it or not, amongst young people, because they're seeing it as a different way that is a little bit more appealing to some of them than unbridled capitalism. And once again, I'm not making a commentary on whether that's a good or bad thing, but it interests me that there seems to be this, in I see at both end of the spectrum, people starting to ask this question of, well, what is enough, and what does the collective good look like, and how might we really wrestle with that question of enough? What is enough, and how our desires play into that, and and make it hard to negotiate that question.
Yeah. The for me, the most important and the most valuable part of this is not the destination, but the journey. The process of taking the time to reflect in this way, and to keep asking those why questions, because that's what leads, I think, to ultimately our deeper understanding, and also a greater capacity to make choices about what we do based on a range of perspectives rather than a single one. So if we use your foil example, and by the way, I will never understand your unending fascination with devices that you have to construct in order to use. So I have a pilot's license and a boat license. I like to get in a plane where the wings were bolted on in the factory. I like to get in a boat where the hull was constructed and the guts of the boat were put in the factory, and just go. You turn up and you like to assemble some wings on the edge of a cliff and jump off. You get to the water's edge, you want to put this on a little plank of something and hope it all hangs together while you... I do not get it. But
I'm seeking counselling for it, by the way.
You essentially made your choice about buying a new foil simply based on speed. Oh, that one goes 20% faster. I want that. And without that depth of internal exploration and reflection on the why behind the why behind the why behind the why, that's what often ends up happening. We make choices, I think, based on a single or maybe two small factors, rather than taking things much more broadly into account. And by the way, this idea is directly applicable in behavioural change, in lifestyle medicine and healthcare as well, for many of the same reasons. So when and you can probably imagine this yourself, when someone turns up to see a physician or a psychologist or a dietitian or whoever it might be, and they begin with something like, "Oh, I've got to lose weight. I've got to lose weight. I've got to get fit. I've got to quit smoking. I've got to do whatever." Very often, the clinician or the practitioner goes straight to a discussion about, well, let's talk about what you can do. You can eat more broccoli, or walk 8,000 steps a day, or whatever it might be. In other words, they're starting to talk straight away about strategies. Now, at some level, that makes sense, because at the end of the day, if you want a change to happen, you've got to do something differently. But there's a really important discussion that I think almost always needs to happen in healthcare, at least when we're talking about behaviour change of that sort, prior to that. And that discussion begins with the question, why? Or if you want a different version of that, what makes that important to you right now? And when we ask the question of someone, well, what makes losing weight important to you right now? The response might be, because I'm just so sick of being overweight. And what's leading to that for you? Well, I want to be able to do the things that my friends are doing. And what's important to you about being able to do the things that your friends are doing? well, every weekend they go out and have a great time and I just can't participate because I feel overweight. And what would it mean to you to be able to join with them in that way? Well, my relationships and so on. And the more we ask that question, why or what's important to you about that or some variation of it, the closer we get to kind of the heart of the need that the person has for change. Not just the superficial urge or impetus to change, but the really deeply encoded need that might drive that change. And that's very important in behavioural change because need and motivator are essentially synonymous with each other in this context. If I talk about a need that I have, I'm also describing what's going to motivate me to go after something, to do something. This is easy to demonstrate. If you're thirsty, you have a need for water, and that need is going to make you go to the kitchen tap and pour yourself a glass of water. If you're hungry, that need is going to shape your behaviour so that you go to the refrigerator and pull out an apple or a mandarin or something like that. So needs are motivators, and in behavioural change contexts, the closer we can get to those, the more we can approach those, and the bigger base of those we can build and understand, the more likely that person is then to have some anchors for their behavioural change efforts that will keep them moving forward, even when things get challenging. Because now I'm not just doing 100 push-ups every day because I feel like I should do 100 push-ups every day because I want to lose some weight. I'm doing 100 push-ups every day because I can see myself getting stronger bit by bit, and I know that doing 100 push-ups every day means I'm going to be able to play ultimate frisbee every weekend with my friends, and I love that game.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of those 5 whys, really, getting back to the root cause, even though you don't like that term. But yeah, I agree with that. And, and once again, Simon Sinek talks about start with why, and it's a great place to start. So, you know what, this has been an interesting discussion. I think for me, it's a bit of a self-examination that I think that I need to take into account. This whole idea of why do I pursue these things, and could they ultimately lead to not just, my poor well-being, like if this pursuit and this desire is unbridled, but even the poor well-being of the planet too. And, maybe we need to be pursuing not so much sort of material affluence, but things like time affluence, social connectedness affluence, putting some of those truly important things front and center, and asking the question, how is this going to affect? If I want these bigger and better toys, it means I have to work more, and then I'm not going to see as much of my family. What does that look like? And so I think this whole idea of asking the question, what's enough? What does enough really look like? Certainly, it's prompted me as we conclude to go back to my garage and then start to look at which toys do I really need here, and which ones maybe do I need to offload. So
and you could while you're in the garage, there's one other thing that you should do. Just lift up all your buckets and make sure they don't have holes in them.
Holes. Well said, brother. Well said.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.